Welcome to the Motorcycles or Drugs podcast, a show where we speak with artists and engineers, connoisseurs and problem solvers from the moto world and beyond. I'm Henri Boulanger.
And I'm Gary Boulanger.
We're a father-son team that has collaborated for years through storytelling and imagery, often combining our creativity with the adventure and community we've found on two-wheeled machines. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Today's guest is Matt Park, a Midwest native and retired Marine. He's been all over the world and now lives in Niles, California, an historical hotspot of silent film production and an enduring hotspot for classic cars. These days, he runs the parts department at BMW Motorcycles in San Francisco. Matt loves everything vintage, from motorcycles and cars to clothing and accessories. Matt Park is coming up next.
This is Matt Park, and you're listening to the Motorcycles or Drugs podcast.
Welcome to the Motorcycles or Drugs podcast. Today's guest is our bearded fashionista pal, Matt Park, a founding member of the Sunday Moto Club and good friend of several European and Japanese clothiers. Hey, buddy. Thanks for joining us in our swank Mountain View studio.
It is absolutely my pleasure, and just honestly, I'm still kind of floored that you guys would want to talk to me. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome to be among the luminaries of the Motorcycles or Drugs podcast.
Well, it is our pleasure. How did you get introduced to power vehicles?
Well, my old man was, I don't know how to characterize him exactly, like an aficionado of cars, I guess. I don't know if he even knew how a car worked because the cars he bought were so bizarre. But when I was a kid, let's see, I remember we had two Gremlins. And again, I don't know how we ended up with that. We had two Renault Lecars, one of which the wheel shot off on my mom as she went around a corner going to work. And my dad was like, "What'd you do to the car?" You know, it was those kind of things. We had a Renault Fuego. I feel like we might have had a Scirocco. We had 3 or 4 Lincoln Continentals, like a 66 suicide door, like a 76 two-door turd brown. Just a big silver Lincoln, just the most bizarre cars. And then Mercurs, the Ford Mercur. I think my dad ended up having like 4 of those. I think my sister wrecked 2 of them. That was a cool car. I said the Fuego. That was the first car that I really drove. No, it was a Toyota Corolla that I kind of learned to drive on at 13. You know, we were out in the country and he's like, "Yeah, you want to go for a ride?" And you know, it was a 5-speed, got going. Illinois State Trooper rolled up alongside of us, just kind of looked over at me. I clearly looked 13, pulled us over, you know, gave my dad a scolding or whatever. But yeah, he was a car guy. And I remember even in like college, him and his buddy had matching, I think they were Chevy Impala convertibles. Like my dad's was red with a white interior. His buddy's was white with red interior. And, you know, so I think that was it. And we had stacks of Road and Track magazine and Car and Driver. All of the car magazines, Automobile, when that magazine came out. So that's where the car thing, vehicles in general came from. It was my old man. He was just like, he'd just come home with cars, like from, you know, I think it was probably like somebody came through our little town in Illinois, broke down, and then said, "Hey, I'll trade it for a Ford." And then my dad'd be like, "Hey, I got a Renault," you know? So
what did your dad do for a living?
My dad, he studied biology. He had a master's in biology, and somehow or another, I think while he was in college at the University of Illinois, he must have worked at a department store, Carson Perry Scott. It was kind of like a big Midwest chain, fancy. And they had a store in Kewanee, Illinois, where I'm from. And he must have been offered to be the manager of that or something. So I think that's why we moved to my town. And then from there, almost the rest of his career, he was an educator of some sort, but like at a business college most of the time. And then before he passed, he was the dean of a community college in Arkansas. So most of the time he was an educator.
You just had the need for vehicular speed.
Yeah, I don't know. And it wasn't even like, like we didn't have hot rods or anything. And, I think it was just like phases. When we had all these Lincolns, I can remember my dad had like this red plaid trench coat, not like a trench coat, but like a winter coat and one of those fuzzy wool hats that got the feather in it kind of. And so he looked like a pimp. And, I don't know if it was just like the 70s kind of thing, but, he was always like really sharp dressed guy, always wearing a suit. He's the kind of guy who had like either too long of jeans that were rolled up like 6 times or cutoffs to mow the yard. And he was wearing those brown shoes with the gold buckle on the top because that was like the shoes that had worn out or whatever. And then he usually wore like a cutoff sleeve TKE fraternity sweatshirt from college. But, otherwise he was like sharp dressed man unless he was mowing the lawn. And then he looked like a homeless guy.
Well, that explains a bit of your origin story as a sharp dresser, because I think when I think of you, one of the first things that springs to mind is I'm always excited to see what you're wearing to whatever function we go to, because it's always, understated, but something special. I mean, even right now you've got on, I don't know how to describe your boots. Are they suede? Are they?
Yeah, I guess they're suede. They're a rough out engineer boot.
And then you got these rad sort of cream colored motorcycle pants and then the navy blue sweater that makes you look like you're about to go, I don't know, hunt a whale or something. I don't know.
This is a relatively new acquisition from North Sea Clothing, the wool diver sweater. I've been eyeballing for a long time and they went on sale. So I finally treated myself to this thing, but it's boss.
And capped off with the Keith Richards skull ring. See, that's the beauty of Matt Park. It works.
A medley of influences. I'm curious, how many cars were there at one time? Because I started losing track of all the cars, which, by the way, I think he just went by the name. I don't even know what a lot of those look like, but I think he went, what's it called? That's a cool name. I want that car, because they've all got something charismatic.
They were all over the place. But God, I will say at any one time, I bet we had 5 cars. But we also had, it was the Midwest, so like we had a big driveway that had a 2-car garage. I don't know that it ever had 2 cars in it. And then we owned the house next to us. It was a rental property, and then acquired another house down the street, which was a rental property. So my first car was a 1976 Volkswagen Scirocco. And when that shit the bed for whatever reason, it ended up in the garage down the street, and then next door was the 66 Lincoln for like as long as I can remember. Like we'd get in there and push all the buttons and stuff. Cause it was, I wish to God I had that car now. It was like the ultimate with the suicide doors. And then I feel like we always had kind of another broke down Lincoln at the tail end of our driveway. And then there was at least one running car that each of my parents had. So probably 5 at any given time. But it was, it's the Midwest. Here you can't have stuff that you're not actively engaged with or you're just suffering the consequences of having to park on the street or whatever.
It does really influence the culture. Now that you're mentioning it, I think of places where space isn't at such a premium and what that must do to, just like your dad, it gives you the opportunity to acquire all this stuff. It's sort of like you'll fill shelves if you put them up. And out here, I'm curious how that affects, do people put more time into a specific car? Do they just get faster at flipping them? Like in your experience living in California, did that change your habits when it came to vehicles?
It should have. But so I think like right now I've got like 9 registered vehicles and I've got a 1-car garage and a driveway now. So no, it should have, but it didn't.
But you do have like-minded friends who have space or know of storage facilities that aren't too far away, right?
Yeah, for quite some time, I got a 1951 Ford that was in a storage lot with our Airstream RV and that's still there, but now the car's in front of my house. But if I got in a pinch, I'm sure I could park near somebody else who's got a bunch of cars. Like a bunch of my neighbors have a bunch of cars. One of my neighbors, his wife is a contractor, and so they own a few houses around the town that I live, but they keep the garages. Like, so, the tenant gets the house, and then she built him a garage behind one of these houses that's got like the two car lifts, so he can have 4 cars in there.
Oh my gosh.
But his dad also has a bunch of cars, like I don't know, what was the first year of the Corvette, like 53 or 54 or something. He's got like a 54, 55 Corvette and like a 60s Pontiac station wagon, which is like the coolest car ever. But all these, he's got places for them. So
what I think is fascinating outside of maybe Petaluma, the ideal Northern California small town is where you live in Niles, because there's this built-in 50s charm with the downtown. The fact that there's, flea markets and swap meets, and, there's always someone cruising, right? Seeing your place and then meeting a lot of the people you just described during your Oktoberfest party last year was a real treat, because it really does simplify, bring it down. And yes, space is a limitation, but if there's a hankering for a vehicle, we all know if we set our sights on it, we'll figure it out, right?
That's true. And yeah, definitely where I live, if that place didn't exist here, I'd probably live in Southern California. But we ended up, kind of embedded in this little, like you said, like a 50s Midwest town that is wrapped in railroad tracks and reservoirs. And if you never went under the railroad tracks or across the tracks, you would never know that like big California exists. It's like the Truman Show there, kind of, or whatever, it's just a weird little place.
It is kind of a land outside of time. I always appreciated taking the trips over there, and we're down in the South Bay. So for anyone who's not from California, there's the San Francisco Bay, and it's this large peninsula, and sort of at the tip of that, San Francisco. Well, we're sort of at the bottom, and then you're over on the east side, so you're across the bay, and there's just valleys and hills and all these little almost coves that if you go riding, it just opens up. Like I know Calaveras Road is one that I never knew about, and I think I'd lived here for 14 years at some point. And you just go around a bend, and I always kind of joke that it looks like the label on a salad dressing, because it's got like those rolling hills, and like a beautiful golden light. Mm-hmm. Just very, very magical.
Well, and the beauty of where you live too, MaD, is Charlie Chaplin really started off with Essanay Productions and with the Tramp.
Yeah,
Keystone
that was
Cops.
filmed right around there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that for those that are listening that are still trying to figure out where exactly this is, that really does center things, and it still sends off the vibe that you're back in time, right? Modern touches, but not too many. I mean, there's a needle to the groove, LP store. There's a wonderful coffee roaster and shop, a lot of antique stores. But, looking at you, knowing you, it is an ideal fit. And you're right. Outside of maybe Petaluma, Southern California is where someone would want to hang their hat. Tell us about your career as a Marine.
Well, yeah. So, I guess when I started college, well, I guess it goes back farther than that. Obviously, my uncle, my mom's brother, was a Vietnam War vet. And when he got out of the military, he gave me like all his stuff. So I got tons of pictures of me and I could outfit my whole posse, all my friends in military uniforms, and we could run around and play army and stuff. People still did that back in our day. And so that kind of got that bug for that. And, that's also when you could go up to the post office and get all the cool brochures for the Army and stuff that had like the special forces and the Rangers and guys coming out of the water with machine guns and jumping out of helicopters. And it just seemed like a cool thing to do. And then all of my great uncles were in World War II on my mom's side. And, I had an uncle who was in Iwo Jima. I guess one of my uncles was on a submarine. One of my uncles was a flyer. And so I'd get those little stories too. And it all just kind of seemed like something that I wanted to do. And super active as a Boy Scout. So being outside camping and hiking. And to this day, I can't get over how great my scout leaders were and how engaged and the things that we did. So like being outside, thought the military stuff was cool. Went to college and I was a recreation major. So I hadn't kind of cemented the fact that I wanted to do the military, but I was in ROTC, Army ROTC. And the funny thing about that is like I had like shoulder length hair and they didn't care kind of thing. But get to learn to take apart machine guns and patrolling. Like we would patrol the golf course at the University of Illinois and stuff, or Illinois State University, where I went to school. And so it was kind of cool stuff, like learning to set up mines. And, it's just a weird kind of thing to do. But I was kind of thinking that I wanted to be like a national outdoor leadership school instructor. I thought that would be like a cool gig. And then it came time, Army ROTC said, hey, if you want to keep getting a scholarship and you want to keep doing this thing, you got to sign the dotted line and say you're going to join the Army. And the unfortunate thing was the Army ROTC guys were kind of thick and slovenly, and, their uniforms weren't sharp looking. And there was one guy there, though, who was pretty amazing, Sergeant Major Willie Chong. He was like the only active duty guy with Thai Border Patrol jump wings, and he had all these. This guy had been to Vietnam and taught hand-to-hand combat to Delta Force, and this guy was amazing. And like that was the only glimmer of hope that you could be something like super cool and not just kind of like a lumpy dude in pants that didn't fit. So I was pretty much decided that was it. I'm not going to do that. And then I went to the student union, and they always got like career booths set up or whatever, and there was two Marines standing there with like one of those TVs with a VCR in it. They were just playing this loop of dudes running around and jumping on ropes and stuff like that. And I was kind of checking it out. And, I'm like, hey, what's this all about? And the guy said, it's not for everybody. It's probably not for you or whatever kind of thing. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? So it was kind of like, the throwdown. And they were also giving out free rides in, I think it was God, I can't remember the number of it, but it's like this. Maybe it's the T4 Texan Trainer, which is like a front and back cockpit, like pull the glass over you kind of plane. So me and my buddy, we went back and we like signed up for this thing. And man, whatever Marine pilot was giving rides, that dude was making use of every minute of his time in those planes. Man, we were doing like loops and rolls and shit that I'm sure he wasn't supposed to be doing with people. But I was like, that's it, man. And it was the era of Top Gun kind of stuff too. So I was like, yeah, I'm in, man. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. This is like the best shit ever. And then, of course, we sit down with a guy, my buddy, who's like a total stoner. I didn't even know what a bong was until I met this guy. He's got like a 3-foot graphics bong in his room. And they were these rich Chicago kids. So they had a CD player and they'd always play Pink Floyd. And it sounded really good. And they're like, you ever do any drugs? You ever smoke weed? And I was like, yeah, I've smoked weed a couple times, And then my buddy, they're like, you ever do any drugs? Nope, never. I'm like, that dude's high right now, So anyway, end up signing up and go to officer candidate school, which is 6 weeks. It's supposed to be between your sophomore and junior year. And that must have been what it was for me. And it was illuminating, I guess. You just pretty much super physical fitness stuff and, some leadership classes and being out in the woods and getting yelled at all day and running around and doing stupid shit. This was like the last of the old school. So we were in squad bays, which were Quonset huts, and out in the middle of nowhere, didn't know where we were. You get dropped off in the middle of the night on a bus and just yelled at and stuff. It's just like Full Metal Jacket, except they didn't hit us and they didn't really cuss. They weren't supposed to, I guess, like with college kids or whatever. I was like, this is fucking ridiculous, pretty much. But it was hilarious too, in the moment even, it was hilarious. And so then I got done with it. It was one of those things where I didn't want to quit. It super sucked. And I had quarter-sized blisters on the backs of my heels and stuff. It was just like epic, kind of funny, painful shit and being just degraded and yelled at and stuff, but it was still kind of cool. And the problem with this program is that you do 2 summers. So you do 6 weeks one summer, and then the next summer you do 6 more weeks. If you were to graduate from college, you could do a 10-week program and then get commissioned and go into the military. And so, I just went back to being a college student, getting drunk all the time and, studying and stuff. And then it came time for the next summer, and they called me up, and they're like, hey, you want to do it? And I was like, oh, shit. Yeah, sure. I was just kind of like, yeah, all right, yeah.
So you didn't have hard and fast summer job plans, obviously.
No. So when I got out of high school, my buddy's dad worked at a farm equipment factory, and I got a job there. And it was like super early in the morning, get off at like 3:00, be completely filthy at the end of the day. Like you'd wear a short sleeve shirt, but your arms would be black, from the sleeve down. They had us doing stuff like counting nuts and bolts, but you would count like 10 and you'd weigh it, and then you'd weigh a giant container of bolts. And then so you'd figure out how many it was. And then me and one of my buddies, we ended up dog balling, which is you're downstream from the welders who are welding these auger tubes, and you get a file that you sharpen every day, and you just knock off the welding BBs so it's nice and clean before it gets painted. And so, I don't even know how long I did that, for a few weeks probably. And then a buddy of mine called me up and said, hey, we need counselors at this church camp that I work at. You want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sounds cool. And I went down and interviewed, and they're like, yeah, sure. So every summer after that, I spent at church camp as a counselor, except for doing the military thing. So again, like, I'm not a religious guy, but, I learned all the Father Abraham songs and all that kind of stuff. And it was a good time. And there's always girls there, because a new influx of church volunteers would come every week with their church. And so there was always like a new crop of girls to hang out with. And we had a good swimming pool. And the camp went from Sunday afternoon to Saturday morning. Saturday, then we cleaned toilets and, made sure all the cabins were clean and stuff like that. And then we had, from when we got done Saturday to Sunday midday, as free time. That's kind of how I ended up learning how to motorcycle ride, was that buddy who got me that job. But getting back to career path stuff, I guess it was just one of those things. So then I went the next summer, and it was the same thing, but better or different, I guess. But I kind of, I dug it still, but I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. And then as I was finishing off college, I was an intern for the St. Louis Regional Experiential Adventure Movement, STREAM. So there was a bunch of like hippie, outward boundy kind of, like went to school at Dartmouth, and let's bring outdoor education to the Midwest masses. And we would do leadership programs for schools and, like some Ritchie schools, and ropes courses for big companies, Monsanto and stuff like that. And again, kind of getting back to the whole like outward boundy thing that I wanted to do. Then I graduated, and they're like, oh, well, you want your commission? I was like, yeah, I guess so. I might as well just do this Marine thing for a while, and then I'll go do the Knowles thing. But I met my wife at that. She worked for the American Youth Foundation, which ran a bunch of camps, summer camps, and STREAM was part of them. So I joined the Marines, went to the basic school, we call it, which is 6 months of kind of learning everything about all the infantry stuff in the Marine Corps. And I don't know that I had planned on staying all that long, but got married, had a stepson come along in that deal. And so that kind of changed perspective on things. And then I just kept getting jobs that I liked. And so I spent 20 years as a Marine. But I started, obviously, you go through training in Quantico, Virginia. Then I spent a year in Japan, went to Korea, Camp Pendleton, Pensacola, Florida, Camp Pendleton, Washington, D.C., Camp Pendleton, Washington, D.C., kind of back and forth. And my last gig was at the Pentagon, which is just kind of super cool, because all you know about the Pentagon is the Pentagon, kind of. But I think it might be the world's largest office building. It's got, it's got all sorts of stuff in there you wouldn't expect. It's got Olympic-sized swimming pool in there, 2 basketball courts, like 4 squash courts, probably like 3 Subways, Popeyes, Dunkin' Donuts, because they don't want you to leave. Dry cleaners, post office, dental facility. I gave blood there all the time. It's got a DMV. It's a bizarre place, but it's a super cool place to work. And, when you tell people you worked at the Pentagon, it just carries a little sand,
During this portion of your life when you're going, from everywhere back to Camp Pendleton, and then everywhere and then back to Camp Pendleton, apparently. Did you have any vehicles at this point? Were you given access to vehicles? What were they?
So had a couple of great sedans. We had, I'm trying to think, let's see, when I started, I had a really crappy, like an 86 Mustang that like caught on fire on me once on the side of the road. And I mean, it was a piece of crap. And I can't even remember. I think I just left it at home because I didn't have a vehicle when I was in the basic school, which is probably good. We did a lot of drinking, and at least I wasn't the irresponsible driver. I was just the irresponsible passenger. But Pam, my wife, she had a Bonneville SSE, which is like a big land yacht kind of super cruiser. And then we bought a 1986 Jeep CJ7, which was pretty much my everyday driver. Had 3 tops, hard doors, soft doors. And in Southern California, I ran a bikini top like all year. Super cool. Today, my biggest regret is selling that, because it was excellent. These old people would drive it to the Lake of the Ozarks to take their boat down there, and then they would drive their boat back. So it had super low miles. It was a black Renegade. It was super cool. I drove the shit out of that thing. And I just was thinking about a funny story driving through the middle of base at Camp Pendleton. They've got these little booths, and it's like share a ride, because a lot of Marines don't have cars. And so there are these guys who are stuck out in the middle of Camp Pendleton, which is a huge, huge, huge place. And I remember rolling up. I got a 9-foot Encinitas surfboard in the back of my Jeep. And I pull up to one of these things. I'm like, "You need a ride, Marine?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah." So we get in, and he's sitting in there. And it's always kind of uncomfortable, just getting a ride. But no doors, got my bikini top on there. And I'm probably wearing board shorts and a T-shirt, which is pretty much everybody's uniform when they're out of uniform in Southern California. And so he starts asking me about, it's like, "Oh, how long have you been in the Marine Corps?" I said, "Oh, 3 years." And he's like, "Oh, you must be a corporal," because that's like a non-commissioned officer. And, you kind of get privileges as a corporal. You're kind of in charge of stuff, and you get to maybe have your own room and stuff. And I said, "No, I'm a captain or a lieutenant." I can't remember. I must have said, I might have been a captain. And this kid, man, he froze up. He was like, "Oh my God, like I'm riding in a Jeep with a captain,"
Was it because of your degree? That the fact that you had a university degree that you had kind of vaunted up a bit more than if you would have just enlisted out of high school?
Well, yeah, you got to have a degree in the Marine Corps to be an officer. But like my buddy, he was a peer of mine, I think he retired probably as a full bird colonel, but his brother did go to Dartmouth or Columbia or something like that and enlisted. And he was always like the smart, super smart, Lance Corporal. And back in those days, you still had the tail end fringes of some of like the Vietnam era guys or early 80s guys, I guess, who maybe like couldn't really read or write, but somehow ended up in the Marine Corps. And so, that was always some funny stories hearing about this guy, he's like Columbia educated journalist guy who was just, like helping them write reports and stuff because they couldn't really write a report. But yeah, so Jeep wise, we had that. My wife and stepson drove that from Missouri to California, which was apparently a hell ride. And then my brother, who I think maybe had just turned 16, I flew him out to California, and we drove that back to Pensacola. And that's when we decided we would never drive that car across country again. It was kind of before you have cars shipped. I think it really wasn't in people's consciousness kind of then.
Well, gas was so much cheaper.
Yeah.
It made more sense to drive it.
But that we had the soft top in there, and me and my brother almost killed each other a couple times, I think. At one point, we had to stop like out in the desert somewhere and put duct tape on the front of the top because it was so tight that it was like pulling the mounting up. So we like duct taped all that. And I bought this like a Skeletor action figure or something to put on the dashboard. And it had like a cannon gun kind of thing. And my brother and I were driving along, and we were on each other's like last nerve, and he's fucking with it. And he pushed the button and shot the thing out the window. And, and my wife said, all of a sudden I saw you guys like your shadows in the Jeep look at each other and then just start laughing. And man, to this day, I'm just cracking me up thinking about it because we were just like, we could have easily just punched each other right in the face then too, but we just started laughing. It was pretty funny. So, but that was the end of the Jeep. My son did learn to drive on that Jeep, and he kept it for a while he stayed in Florida. Then we had a Oldsmobile Aurora, which was another part of reason having these big cruiser cars is my son played traveling soccer. And in Pensacola, Florida, that means you got to travel to like Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi to go to games and stuff because there's like nothing in the redneck Riviera there. It's just very simple place. And so soccer's still kind of like, oh, that game, whatever. Yeah. So that was that right before I shipped out to Kuwait, before the war started, before we knew the war was going to start. I bought a 1951 Ford that I'd been eyeballing for a long time. I bought it in like St. Charles, Missouri. Took it for a test ride. Brakes went out. Managed to limp it back to the place. And my wife because I was deploying, she was going to stay in St. Louis. So she recovered the car. She picked me up in California in that car when I got back from, after the war had started. And then we had I had a Nissan Frontier, which was just a good utility vehicle. Until just recently. Now my wife bought our son's Toyota Tacoma truck. But during the military time, mostly that 51 Ford in my truck was what we had. And then I since bought a 64 Land Rover, and I got a whole bunch of motorcycles.
Did you find your way back to motorcycles after the military period?
So going back to like the summer of 1985, my buddy who got me that job, he had Volkswagen Karmann Ghia and this Kawasaki, I don't know if it was like a 750 or something like that, but it had a kind of a cool red tank and stuff. And he's like, hey, you want to learn to ride? I was like, yeah, definitely. So we go out in the gravel parking lot at Sunday morning that we got our time off. And I knew how to drive a stick shift. So, he's like, this is clutch, brake, whatever. So he said, let's go for a ride. So we go into town to this place where we had breakfast a lot of times. And so I learned to ride with a dude on the back, telling me what to do and stuff. We get there, have breakfast, and we got to get back because the campers are coming. And my buddy's like, I'll ride back. And Illinois, 1980s, I was wearing a super cool Banana Republic safari jacket that my mom bought me and jeans or shorts, maybe, probably jeans. My buddy, same thing, T-shirt, jeans. And we came hot around this corner, coming back to camp, hit some gravel. And the next thing I know, I'm just like looking up at the sky. I sit up. There's no motorcycle. There's no nothing. I turn around. There's my buddy. Motorcycle's wrecked. He's on the ground. He's super pissed because, that was his baby kind of thing. And we were okay. Obviously I did a complete flip. I was holding the strap, on the seat kind of thing. And I had a grass stain on my jacket, which I was really upset about. And we rode back to camp, and the last stretch down to camp is this huge, long gravel hill. And I was like, dude, I got to walk. And I was kind of a little, kind of limpy or whatever. But we got back to camp. The gal who was like the family who ran the camp, she washed my jacket. So that was cool. Got my jacket clean. And then I never rode again until 1996, 10 or 11 years later. I was taking a buddy to the airport in Pensacola, and it's like one of those kind of dream sequences, I look off to the side and I see there's this kind of little funky motorcycle place, and there's that same quality of color over there. And it's a 1969 Triumph Bonneville with an Olympic flame, which is kind of a red-orange tank. And I'm like, wow, what is that thing? So I drop my buddy at the airport. I come back, I look at it, and I decide I'm going to buy that motorcycle. And I didn't tell my wife, which is pretty much a recurring theme with vehicles and me. But I take my Jeep over there. I got the money, buy the thing. I say, I think I need a helmet. They got 2 helmets for sale. So I get this giant helmet. I get on the bike, and I can't figure out how to start it. I'm like, I don't know how this thing goes. I mean, he gives me a quick rundown on the kickstart and that stuff. But I can't get it in gear. And he's like, this is a British motorcycle from the 60s. It shifts on the opposite side, brakes on the opposite side. So I've got one day a motorcycle lesson, where we also ended up in a wreck. And so now I'm on this British motorcycle and a giant helmet. And I take off, and I was like, oh my God. I mean, it was just I don't even know how to describe it. But I mean, you guys have ridden a motorcycle for the first time kind of, and it was that kind of feeling. I was like, oh my God, I'm a motorcycle guy again, whatever. Or again, the 3 hours before. But yeah, I'm a motorcycle guy, and killed the damn thing like 3 times. And I got it. So I got to go through the whole kickstarting procedure and figure all that shit out, which is probably good. And then I roll home, and probably the scariest part, there's this 3-mile bridge between Pensacola and Gulf Breeze where we lived. And it's just like, it might have been 4 lanes, might have only been 2 lanes. But it's like going over the water on a bridge, and you're like, oh shit, I don't know why, but when I go over a bridge, I always feel like my vehicle is just going to like veer off and go off the bridge kind of thing. So
either a major crosswind, or you're going to veer so hard to the right, you're going to, go off into the drink.
So that was the fear factor there. But I rip up into the driveway, and my wife and son come out the door because they're just like, what happened to the Jeep? Because this doesn't sound like the Jeep, They're like, oh, something happened to the Jeep. And I'm on this motorcycle, and they're like, oh my God, you got a motorcycle? And I was like, oh my God, I got a motorcycle, And I was so excited. This kind of little neighborhood I lived in Gulf Breeze, Florida, had like it was like a bunch of weavy around kind of housing, so there was like a bunch of curves in the road, and it was, there's no lines on the road or anything like that. But I was like, man, I gotta ride some more, So I'm like, I'm gonna go for another ride. And so I turned it around in the driveway, and I'm still a new rider. So I pop the clutch, I shoot across the street, through the neighbor's front yard, around this big tree stump. I mean, it was like Great Escape, exactly, kind of like rip around this tree stump, get back on the road, and take off down the road while my wife and son are standing in the driveway with their mouths wide open. It's just like I'm totally out of control, and now I'm whipping around the neighborhood and stuff. And so I rode that to work a lot. And then that was Pensacola. Then I went back to Camp Pendleton, and that was a regular vehicle because I didn't have my Jeep. So I rode that to work a lot, that old Triumph. And I remember I got back from deployment. It was just like a month-long thing. And my boss had given me some avgas, like 126 octane stuff. And I put it in my motorcycle, and I was on my way to work. And man, my bike sounded really good. I hadn't ridden it for a month. And I was like, man, this bike sounds so good, And then I noticed these 2 kids walking down the sidewalk, like pointing and laughing at me. And I was like, fuck those kids, they don't know what a cool motorcycle is. And I realized they're laughing at the muffler from my bike is bouncing down the road while I'm riding forward. So I was like, oh shit, no wonder my bike sounds so good. And I go around, I pick it up, and I drop it off, and I get to work, and I tell my boss, I'm like, yeah, I lost the muffler on my bike. I think it's that gas you gave me, and that's why I'm late. He's like, I got to see this. And he goes out, and he's like, you lost both mufflers. And I was like, I lost one muffler. And he's like, you lost both mufflers, partner. And I was like, oh, shit, So that bike then was gateway drug. Then I bought a 2001 Ducati S4 Monster. It was really cool, Senna gray with red wheels. And then my wife got a Monster, 750 Monster.
Did Pam have a history of riding?
I think she may have ridden, like her brother might have had a motorcycle, but I don't think, like, not really, So she took the rider's course and whatever. And she loved it out there because you could ride up and down the Pacific Coast Highway, and she could go to work and stuff without really getting into on the highway traffic and stuff. And then I fell into that whole Ducati like vacuum where the S4 came out, was a 916 motor. And then the S4R came out with a 996 motor. And I thought I really needed to have that. So I traded in my bike, and I got that. And then they came out with the S4 RS, and I was like, fuck Ducati. I'm not playing this game, I can't afford it. So that's the last Ducati I bought, was that. It's blue with the white wheels, really cool. And then when I wanted to buy my BMW, I bought my BMW, and I sold my Ducati to my son. And I should have given him a lot more instructions because he really hasn't done any maintenance on it. And I bought it back from him, but it's still in his garage in Southern California. Yeah, one of these days I'll have to pick that up, but I really don't have anywhere to put it.
No, you don't. It was nearly 7 years ago where you and I first met. It was that Sister Centennial arrival party at the Denese store. And I was managing, and you were there with the posse from San Francisco BMW. Tell us about how you got into that role. Tell us about your role there, but tell us how you got into working for a motorcycle dealership, because if memory serves, weren't you also interested in possibly building bicycle frames, and you learned how to be a proper motorcycle mechanic?
Yeah. It's not the typical path for a retired Marine officer. So I was a communications officer in the Marine Corps. I retired as a lieutenant colonel after 20 years, and I pretty much decided I didn't want to see another phone or computer or satellite system or whatever. Luckily, I kind of had the freedom to do something like that. A lot of my peers have younger kids, and so they kind of got to get a really good job to keep them in school and pay for a house and stuff like that. And when I retired, I had a lot of bicycles, and I kind of thought that I wanted to be a bicycle guy. I mean, I love motorcycles. I had a couple motorcycles, obviously.
And you were like, what if this was harder?
Oh my, I can't even imagine. It's mostly, because honestly, in the big scheme of things, a lot of what I did was customer service kind of stuff, really, in the Marine Corps. It was getting people connected with the things they needed, and I mean, I worked for some like big dudes. Like I worked for General Mattis. I mean, so he ended up being the Secretary of Defense. But I mean, tough customers who, need that kind of thing. And I just wanted to do something that was totally more like leisure related kind of, or more something along my passion than that. I mean, I didn't really care about that kind of stuff. I wasn't like the guy who went home and coded stuff on the weekends or built my own computers or any of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, fantastic. Government offers a GI Bill, so I had some money to go to school. I retired, and I spent a few months in St. Louis just kind of doing nothing. And then I went to Ashland, Oregon to the bike school up there, and I went through basic mechanic course, advanced mechanic course, wheel building school, frame building school, built a frame. And it seemed like a super cool thing, but I kind of still had some money to spend. I decided, hey, maybe I ought to go to motorcycle school. So I went to Wyotech in Fremont, and that's how I ended up in this area. And I studied, they got like, I don't know how long it is, but it's, probably at least 6 months of basic motorcycle school stuff, electronics and how motorcycle engines work and stuff like that. And then I took the Harley course. I took the Triumph course and was a certified Triumph mechanic, took the Japanese course, like Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, did KTM. We didn't have BMW there. And then I did Ducati, and I passed the first level of certification for Ducati. And I was still a Ducati guy, so I really kind of wanted to get a job with Ducati. One of the guys from North America had come down to our school. We had a Ducati training facility there. I got hired a couple of times as a student to do press bike PDIs, pre-delivery inspections. So we would spend all day Saturday building up, hyper motards or monsters or whatever it was, and putting them on the dyno, make sure everything was good so that they could take them for these press releases. And the North America guy said, yeah, when you're ready for a job, give me a call. And so I really thought I would work for Ducati, but that guy kind of ghosted me. Then there was a job opening at Monroe Motorcycles in the city, which is an old school Ducati Triumph place. And I have old Ducatis and Triumph. So they were hiring like a part-time parts guy. I put my application in there, and I didn't hear anything from them. So that was a little sad. Figured, I'll try like one more motorcycle thing, see where it goes kind of deal. And they were looking for a lot tech at BMW Motorcycles in San Francisco. So I went in there and I interviewed. And it's one of those kind of weird things, when you've had a job like I had, and when you give somebody a resume and says, hey, I've worked on the joint staff at the Pentagon, interviewing for a job to like make sure the toilet paper was in all the rolls, all the motorcycles got washed, the oil drums got filled and emptied, the oil filters got crushed. So luckily the GM there, Larry, was like, yeah, if you want to do it. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine with it. Cause I kind of like, I feel like you kind of got to earn your chops, and you got to work your way up, and you got to do the dirty stuff to get your feet in the door. And so that's what I did. I was looking back through some of my old notebooks, and we were super busy. One week I washed 40 motorcycles. And that's like getting down, cleaning the wheels and all that stuff. That was a lot in addition to everything else. And then I kind of started working into the parts department. The parts manager, he's from Japan, and his kids were going to the Japanese school. And as soon as they finished school, they were going to go back to Japan. So they got finished with school, and I got offered the job as the parts manager at the motorcycle shop there. But I think when we met, I was probably still just working in the parts department as parts guy.
Now, Matt, you and I share an appreciation for the main character, Sheriff Walt Longmire, from the popular TV show. Why do you think that is? Gene and I just started watching the series for the third time.
God, that's a good question. I love, God, I just love so much stuff about that character. I mean, I love how he never has a phone, but it doesn't matter, you know? And I love how he drives that old truck. And God, I don't know, he's just a genuine dude. And one of the things, too, I like about him is like that show in the books, they don't, you know, he's a flawed character, you know? I mean, he's got issues, and I mean, he's just a real legit dude. Plus he's got a cool job, you know? I mean, he's a sheriff. I don't know why I like that Walt Longmire, but I definitely like that guy. Just kind of legit, true person, kind of. I feel like that character that Craig Johnson created, like a real dude.
Yeah, I think I'm revisiting it. I discovered it when I was on my BMW R1150 RT riding to meet Gene in Wisconsin in late May of 2017. Stopped at a friend's house overnight in Colorado Springs, Chris Pierce. And it was the morning that I got the text from my daughter that Nikki Hayden had passed away. And I was feeling pretty sad. And that night, we went out to a restaurant, came back, and Chris was like, you seem kind of tired, but you want to have some ice cream and watch something with me? I'm like, sure. Puts on Longmire. I'd never heard of it. We watch it. And, the episodes are 45 minutes, 55 minutes or something. We ended up watching 3 in a row. And then I go up to my room. He's got this condo. I go up to my room and I flip open my laptop, and somehow I watched Colin Hanks' documentary about the shootings in Paris, Eagles of Death Metal. And so I'm seeing just, it was a mix of all this humanity and sadness. But Walt was so human. First of all, I like the fact that in that first episode, in the pilot episode, he's walking across the city square to the office, gets out of his Bronco, and there's cigarette butt on the sidewalk. He picks it up, and he had crushed cans in his Bronco in the next episode, and he crashed. He was going down to some call, and he had avoided hitting something, and people thought he was driving drunk. They weren't Rainier
I remember
cans.
that. That's right. Yep.
He picks up trash. So Gene's nickname for me is Sheriff Tidy. So, all these things, but the authenticity and the humanity is pretty rare. Plus the cabin that he has is unkept, which is the only thing about him that's unkept. Right.
That, and the funny thing is I started reading the books, and I'm a huge judge a book by its cover guy. I bought so many crappy books because they had a great cover. And the cover of those books was just really intriguing. So I remember I probably read 2 or 3 of them before that little gold star appeared on the next one that said coming soon as a FX TV show or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for that, And it's clear that because I follow a couple of those dudes on Instagram, actually I follow a bunch of those guys on Instagram. And man, what I love is to see, I can't even think of the actor's name. I can't think of any of the actors' name. Oh, Adam Bartley is Ferg.
Yeah.
But Longmire and Ferg, like they hang out all the time. Like they were in Australia recently, and they're both wearing, I think, Vikings jerseys, watching a Vikings game at like first thing in the morning, But I was like, how great, man, that clearly those people are as good a people as the characters they portrayed. And maybe that's, what brought life to them is, that all those people were like legitimately that kind of good people in the show. But I could take a couple more seasons of Longmire easy. I need to go back and watch that because it's just such a great show.
It's worth it. The simplicity of it all, the feistiness of Vic, the Philadelphian. Yep. Branch has kind of like that Easter Island head demeanor about him. But when Henri and I were riding across the country on Harleys nearly 5 years ago now, we pull up to Sturgis because it was on our punch list, and we get off our bikes, and in a matter of 35 seconds, it's the actor that played
Zahn McClarnon. He played the chief of the Indian Tribal Police.
I follow him on Instagram too. Again, seems like a great dude.
That's part of it, is the casting of it. You see all the main characters, Cassidy Freeman, who played Walt's daughter. They're so down to earth, and to cast actors and actresses that are authentic, seemingly authentic in their real lives, right? But we get off our bikes, and I walk over and I say, first of all, I got to say, I really dig your work in Longmire. Well, thanks, man. He's short, He's on a big Indian Roadmaster either Roadmaster or Roadmaster Elite. And I think I had just ridden one for Cycle World maybe a couple months before. So we're talking bikes. And he had ridden from LA, and he has a connection with Brand Amp, the same agency that provides bikes to influencers, celebrities, and the media. So we're kind of talking about that a little bit. And then we say our goodbyes. Hey, thanks, man. This is super cool. And then minutes later, there's Roland Sands. Hey. And Henri hadn't met Roland yet. It was just one of those situations where, I mean, obviously Sturgis is Sturgis. It's not for everybody. But the fact that we had this FaceTime with people, and they were so excited to see fellow motorcyclists, I don't think the actor from Longmire, we spoke about it briefly, but kind of our agreement is when we see or meet a celebrity, whether it's Keanu Reeves at the Quail, you might talk about their roles and what they're famous for. But if you start talking about bikes, they really start lighting up. And that's authentic as well. You don't want to be a fanboy all the time. Who are some of the people you've dealt with at the BMW shop that are a little more colorful, a little pseudo celebrity or big time celebrity, either for parts or for bike sales and so forth?
You're probably talking about my Ray LaMontagne story. He bought a breastplate for an R9T from us. The funny thing is, like, I think a lot of people don't know who that guy is, or they know that one song of his or whatever. But when it comes up like in rotation in the shop, I'm like, Ray LaMontagne. I'm like, he's a customer of ours. So that's pretty funny. But as far as like celebrities, I missed out. Dave Chappelle came in and bought a couple of bikes few months ago. Roland Sands did come in the shop before the Moto Bay Classic. He was a really nice dude. I was very, very impressed. That's about it for celebrities in our shop. But I mean, I stumbled upon a bunch of people at events who are really good, really just nice folks. Brian Fuller from Fuller. I met him at the Barber Vintage Days, like a long time ago, like 2010 or something like that, maybe.
Well, I know when Jean listens to this, she's going to blush because she has a bit of a crush on Brian. She's met him a few times.
He was a cool dude. I mean, he was a good dude.
Very solid down there. That Black Vincent he had at the Quail last year was a mind melder. And he was so excited. And of course, Jean said, Brian, tell me about this bike. And he's getting all geeked out on the bike. And I'm looking at Jean, and she's kind of looking at the bike, but she's has that dreamy look in her face, which I adore. I think it's wonderful. That's the kind of the beauty of bikes and people.
But as far as other folks that I've met, I haven't met any celebrities who were not, or what I would call celebrities in the bike world anyway, who were not just like cool, genuine people. We were at that Sportsman's Cup, and I got to meet Brian Thompson. He was a super cool guy. I got to throw my leg over like one of my all-time favorite motorcycles that once got the arrow on the tank. I met Dimitri Costa there, who was I've been a fan of his because he's just such a funny character, cruising around in a 70s van with a 67 Triumph and racing. I like that whole OFSA thing he had going, one size fits all, or OSFA. Did I say that right? Anyway, by just putting different tires and wheels on a bike and racing it in all different kind of races. I thought that was super cool. And I think he did Pikes Peak even on that bike. Who else? Roland Stocker and Ola Stengard. Both of those guys, I met them at the Moto Beach Classic. Really good dudes. I mean, they talked to me, just like anybody else, free with their time, which was really, really nice. Who else did I meet there? Chopper Dave, this casting guy from down in LA. Again, super nice guy. He makes a lot of, if you go to Chopper Dave's website, I think it's a little spicy parts of it. So, I think you get warned before you go in there. But he makes some really cool castings. Shinya, I met him at Pomona when they were still doing flat track races at Pomona. And I don't think he was like famous like he is now, kind of. I mean,
Greasy Hand Preachers, the documentary, really catapulted him because he was one of the central figures in the beginning and the end with his Bonneville run, and just how humble and soft-spoken. When someone's so soft-spoken, you kind of draw in. And I remember after we met Shinya at the Bonneville Speed Week in 2018, right after Sturgis that year, it was hot. It was 106, 107. And he's wrenching on his old Harley, and they're getting ready for another run. And his wife Ayu's there, and she's offering us water, and he's asking us if we're comfortable. And Henri's taking 100 million pictures because you just have this hands-on, steampunk isn't the right word, but he was so gracious. And we ended up seeing him another time at his shop later that month. And again, we get down there, we lane split for way too long.
Yeah, one hellacious hour just screaming through traffic to try to get there on time. First time I'd ridden in LA, and we're flying along on borrowed Harleys in between lanes. Terrifying. Like one of the worst times I've had on a motorcycle, and so conflicted because we're on our way to go check out the shop of my favorite motorcycle builder. So, and I don't know how to get there. So if I get separated from Gary, I'm like,
I just said, just keep an eye on the yellow Nex helmet, and we'll get there. We got there just in time. And again, Ayu and Shinya offer us water. And I brought some of Jean's homemade banana chocolate chip muffins. And at first, Shinya's like, no, thank you. And Ayu takes a bite, and she kind of gives the raised eyebrows, and he goes, okay. And then he asks for another one.
That's so cool.
And it's that moment of exchange, but that's why we had to hot tail it down there, because we had a window.
well, and he's cool too, because he, back when like West Coast choppers and the cable shows and the chrome and the sort of concepts, and when that was kind of the public's idea of a custom motorcycle, he had his outfit in Tokyo and then moved it over to LA. So he's had different kinds of renown and sort of fame, and then almost redefined kind of what he did or what he was known for with Zero Engineering and or Zero Style Chabot Engineering sort of things.
Yeah.
But, it is interesting to see that sort of change. And then there's something like Greasy Hand Preachers that comes in and captures the imagination of, a whole different subset of motorcycle fans.
When I ran into him, I mean, I was just like, I saw him and I went running down the bleachers and I was like, oh my God, are you Shinya? And I was like, I love your stuff. And the thing is, I tried to bring a couple of things, but I couldn't find them. I packed a bunch of stuff at my house. But have you seen the book, the Zero Engineering book that they put out? It's old because it was from when he was doing that stuff. But I've got a autographed copy of it that I ordered from Japan back in the day. And man, those bikes, his new stuff, all metal kind of is super cool. But those Zero bikes, man, and they were all photographed in like the most gorgeous places, like in front of Shinto shrines and 700-year-old wooden doors. And man, those bikes, I mean, I just fell in love with those things. They were gorgeous. And you're right, it was a time when Orange County Choppers and West Coast Choppers and Choppers Inc., were all doing kind of the same thing. I mean, I did like watching that stuff because it was an opportunity to get to see motorcycle stuff on TV, and unique stuff, and the build-off shows were particularly cool. The Orange County Choppers, and Jesse James has had a couple of shows too. But, even his stuff is, there was a lot of cool, thoughtful work, and that was his kind of style out there. And I've been to that shop before it closed down, and there was a lot of cool cars and motorcycles and stuff in there. He built a motorcycle for Airstream, and our Airstream RV had some issue, and we had to get it fixed. And so I had to drive to Ohio to get it done. And in a back corner of some big warehousey space was that Airstream motorcycle. It was just like sitting there,
Really?
like cast off kind of, which was super sad because like the sidecar on that was amazing aluminum work and stuff. But it's just kind of funny to see something like that, that had such notoriety now not appreciated or whatever.
Well, speaking of custom bikes, your shop has 2 bikes that are kind of making the rounds the last few years. Tell us about those bikes.
Yeah, we started doing some custom R9Ts. I mean, that was kind of the whole thing behind those. Our service manager, who's our master mechanic, he did some really cool stuff with R9Ts. A lot of people have done that kind of airbox removal, but he came up with a deal where he was using like Mishimoto turbo hoses from tuner cars, feeding them into a Roland Sands Harley air filter under the seat, which is like super cool. So we've done 2 or 3 R9Ts, the latest of which was a bike for the Roots Soccer Club in Oakland. And a local graffiti guy, I think, did the tank and the paint on that. A local gal did the wheels, which are absolutely amazing. That's a cool bike, and I'm a big R9T fan. I've got one myself. But the most outrageous bike we just built, a R18. Oh man, now the style escapes me, but it's kind of Mexican car style, motorcycle style. I think it starts with a V. Now I can't remember. Anyway, but one of our guys who works at our shop is a Harley guy, like through and through, but he took like all the Harley kind of things that he thought would be cool to do and did them to that R18. And I mean, he was the vision behind it, but our crew of mechanics were the guys who made it all happen. But they put an extended front end on it. The paint got sent off to a really famous Harley paint guy. All the parts got chromed and sent off to an engraver in Colorado. And so it's had a lot of names. And the guy whose vision behind it, he does some leather work. So he did the seat. If you ever get to see it, it's got the Vlasic pickle bird on there. Because the bike is green, we started saying it's kind of a big deal, like kind of a big deal kind of thing. So he made that pickle seat, and then it got a few different names, but the Engraved Digger, I think, is what it's being called most recently because of all the engraving on there. And we had there was a few issues with all that engraving, like it didn't go, some of the people who did stuff to the bike didn't know about like how bike works. They just know like how engraving works. So the brake reservoirs got like completely stripped of everything and then chromed and engraved, but then we couldn't put them back together again because you can't get the pieces.
Right.
But it's a gorgeous bike. And honest to God, I rode it to a Moto Social in San Francisco, which, shout out to the Moto Social guys. And man, that bike was cool to ride. And I mean, it looks completely outrageous, but it rode really well. And I mean, one of these days, somebody will buy that bike, I guess, from us, and it'll be a cool ass bike to be rolling around on. I haven't seen any. There's only been a couple of R18 builds that I think even compared to the work that we put in our shop, and that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that our owner digs doing project stuff like that. Did you find a picture of the seat?
It's pretty rad. I will say at first blush, it definitely doesn't look like a BMW until you kind of stop being dazzled by all the detail work and the fairing. It looks really good. It kind of reminds me of a turtle or like one of the green shells in Mario Kart. I don't know if you ever played that video game, but yeah, some of the work that's on there is really incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's all like hand engraved. It's not, stuck in a machine and a laser did all that stuff. We had some videos of the dudes doing this stuff, and it's like some old school, like drive across the border to Tijuana and get your upholstery and engraving done kind of stuff. These are dudes who are out there doing dirty, gritty work that's artisanal kind of, and probably super underappreciated in the modern world when you can come up with a CAD drawing, toss a piece of aluminum in a big expensive machine, and then come out with something that will look similar, but, doesn't have that wabi-sabi kind of, hand.
Or the story, the fact that you're able to. I mean, look, half the time we're standing around these bikes talking about them. We're only in motion on them so much of the time. The rest of the time we're telling stories, and you can say who did this about it and who did that, and it's so much better when you're able to say, yeah, there's this guy. We got these pictures of him, as opposed to, we kind of modeled this up and pressed go, and that's still great, and it still comes up with a really cool result. But when there is that extra story behind it.
Especially here of all places, because I know there's another local bike shop who was doing some cool R18 stuff, but it was, we got to see all the digital renderings of what it was going to look like and stuff. And our digital renderings were all done with like a Sharpie on the piece of cardboard, that was left over from a box that had a part in it kind of. And it's like, I think we ought to do this kind of thing or whatever. So, I mean, I didn't have any real play or say in that Engraved Digger bike, but I just think it's gorgeous, and it just really, it's a reflection of the guy who came up with the ideas, and he got pretty much the stuff that he wanted to get done to that bike, and found the people who could do it, craftsmen.
And that brings excitement to his daily work too, having a project with an objective. And we were just talking before this podcast session how that bike just spent this past weekend at the Mama Tried show in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, sponsored by Harley. And I was at that show a year and a half ago, and there's a lot of custom Harleys on tap. So when you have a bike that, like Henri said, first glance you walk by and you go, Harley, oh, BMW R18, oh, it draws you in. And I giggled a bit because I remember, as I mentioned earlier, when I rode my BMW touring bike across the country to Wisconsin, Gene flew in, spent a couple days, and then threw her on the back, and we went to the Harley Museum. And there's this big parking lot. We go in, and I think there was a Kawasaki, an Indian, a newer one, and the rest were Harleys, obvious reasons. Take the tour. A few hours later, we come out. Our bike is all by itself. No one parked by us. And I remember taking a picture of it, and you've got this lone Bavarian in a sea of American iron or something is whatever I posted on social. And it is kind of like that. But I did realize at the time at the Mama Tried show that they were bringing a lot of other brands in, because when you go to a custom bike show, it can't just be all the same. Like, just if you're to see nothing but vintage, classic, and modern BMWs, after a while, that get a little boring too.
Yeah, and there's a history. I've got a stack of old like chopper magazines that I found on the street in Big Bear. Somebody's old lady, I'm sure, made him like throw out all these magazines, and we were on a walk, so I had to hump them all the way back to where we were staying. But you go in there, man, there's Hondas, and there's always like there's a weird like BMW. I've seen a couple of different pictures. It was like a Boxer, but like crazy raked up, and people made a chopper out of whatever they had. It didn't have to be a Harley. And then there's all the, the crazy, like a couple of guys have done recently, or not so distant past, like the Plum Smuggler and the something else, like a really stretched out kind of, but I think that was like a Honda or Suzuki motor or something in that maybe, or, people just got what they could get and made it their own. And that was cool. And I think I love Harley customs, I've been to Born Free a ton of times, and you always see a ton of cool bikes down there. Nice thing for me is I start to see a lot more vintage Triumphs kind of work their way in there. And I've got a bunch of vintage Triumphs, or I've had a few, and I like to see those things. It's just somebody putting a different spin, or their spin, or, taking what they have and making it their own. I think that's awesome.
And I think that is something that sort of defines the motorcycle community, but also just the motorcycle as this history and as these objects that are art and vehicles and tools and just things to be appreciated in more ways than one, which you do. You cherish the cars, you cherish the motorcycles, and there's a lot to appreciate about the past. We've kind of talked about people taking that and reinventing them, or applying these different styles and sort of remixing it. What does the future of motorcycles specifically look like to you, both in the trends, how we're going to interact with them, where we're going?
Oh man, I have no idea. Obviously electric stuff is coming up. I like some of the cool electric stuff that's been done. For me, I always kind of like thinner bikes, and I like metal on motorcycles. The new Ducatis are cool, but the Street Fighter and stuff, if it had a metal tank, I think it would be cooler. And then there's some, there's obviously some of the Ducatis have like a metal plastic kind of combination of things. But I would like to see more. I guess I would like to see less plastic on bikes, if I had to say. But I think, despite what's coming down the line, I don't think electric is going to replace combustion motors for motorcycles anytime soon. I think it's going to be, that Rush Red Barchetta story. The motorcycle guys are going to be out there ripping around on Calaveras Road, dodging the cops in the air cars while they're enjoying their ride, and then sneak back to the garage, throw it under the cover, and, sit out front and put the air in their electric bicycle or whatever, while the cops go by. I think if it ever got to that, the motorcycle people would be like the pry it from my cold dead hands guys,
Still be sort of the outlaws.
I do think the electric scene will open stuff up to more people. I see a bunch of, I don't want to disparage anybody, but there's a lot of morons ripping around on electric bicycles in the city,
You share sidewalk space, when, everyone in the room here is bicyclists, bicyclists really shouldn't be on the sidewalks. So when they're propelled with an electric motor, it gets pretty spicy and dodgy.
Yeah, that's the thing, is because they sneak up on you, you hear bicycles and bicycles, while they come up quick, they don't come up that quickly. So, in the city, that's where I see the scary part of that. It's one thing if you're riding in the street in the bike lanes or whatever, but then there's a ton of people who ride those bikes, and they got all the gear on, and they're riding in the road, and they're doing the right thing. But I still get lane split on by electric bikes once in a while, and it scares the crap out of me, if I'm not prepared for it. The Harley guys, you can hear them coming from a million miles away, and the adventure guys all got the yellow clear water lights on there now, so you catch them in your mirror, like from 100 yards back that they're coming. But the electric guys, I've had a handful of them sneak up on me, and it's scary, mostly because, I like to accommodate motorcycles for lane splitting, but I don't ride on the shoulder. So, or I don't drive on the shoulder. So, when I'm driving my car, I like to be able to give those guys their space.
And your dealership was the first Alta dealership back in the day as well. So you have a almost first mover status with that scene. Obviously, they didn't really last long enough to really make a true footprint impact like Zero electric bikes have. But that must have been interesting too, because you have, the BMWs are meant to go, especially the GS bikes are meant to go long and as long as you want, 300 miles before breakfast sort of thing. That must have been well-intentioned, but a curious mix to have those bikes in there.
Yeah, I think proximity was probably very much how we probably ended up as the first dealer for Alta. They were just down the road at Brisbane, so super close. They made a killer bike. It was awesome, and there's still a whole forum of those guys, doing tips and tricks and figuring out, there's like a handful of super smart dudes on there who've done stuff, and they pass on their knowledge to everybody else. And when I unearth some Alta part in the back of our thing and I put it up there, there's always somebody jumping on, like, oh, I'll take that part, because I'm still stumbling upon like little odd and end Alta pieces that we had in stock. Yeah, I'm sad that they went out because that was a really good bike. But I see like these cake bikes seem fascinating to me. I like a skinny bike. I like skinny choppers. I like skinny motorcycles. Even the retro bikes of today, sometimes, I throw a leg over a new Triumph, and it's so much bigger and bulkier than any of my 60s Triumphs. Also think, I don't know if it's like a self-perpetuating cycle. Do motorcycle companies make leader bikes because they think Americans want leader bikes, or do we want leader bikes and so the motorcycle companies make leader bikes,
I think the industry is always chasing its own tail based on data from who knows when.
Yeah, it just seems ridiculous. Like the R18, I love that bike, but instead of making an 1800cc bike, would it have been cool to make that a 900cc bike and make it smaller and more...
A bit more manageable.
Yeah. And honestly, it rides super well, and I was super amazed at how nicely that bike rides. But, I've got a bunch of 650 Triumphs in my garage, and those things, back in the 60s, dudes rode all over the place on them. That Simon... I can't think of his first name now. The Jupiter Travels guy.
Ted Simon.
Yeah. He might have had a 750 Triumph, but that fucker rode all over the world on that thing,
And did it again in 30 years later.
Yeah, exactly. We get guys who come in the shop and they're like, oh, what's the wind like on this or whatever? And I'm like, shit, I don't know. I've never ridden anything but a naked bike. And because I had that giant helmet to start with, I think I've always ridden with the visor up, unless it's raining, because I think my head was completely lost in that giant globe of a helmet. So I don't have any concept of like my helmet is noisy or my helmet is quiet or what's this windscreen going to do for me kind of thing, because I just don't understand that stuff. Dude, that Cannonball Baker guy rode across country on, what was that thing, like 16 horsepower motor. If you ever get a chance, look up the Abernathy boys. I want to say it was like a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old rode an Indian motorcycle in Washington, D.C. or something. Their dad was this crazy guy who jumped off his horse and caught wolves. And they were friends of Teddy Roosevelt. Seriously, man, if you haven't heard about these guys, this is like a movie that should have been made a million times over. Legit, these kids, they ride this motorcycle all over the place. I think they may have taken maybe they took a horse trip first, and then they rode a motorcycle, and then they got this car company to back them, and they took this car from Washington, D.C. after they met Teddy Roosevelt and drove home. And again, the kids, I think they started when they were 10 and 4 or something. And then, obviously they got a little older, but.
And here's you at 13 getting pulled over in Illinois because you obviously look like a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
Right.
It goes, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from these Abernathy boys, but part of it is, it's like you could do anything on any bike.
Yeah.
I mean, you just got to do it. It's just like when somebody goes, can you walk there from here? Well, how much time you got?
Yeah.
You can walk to fucking China from here. It's going to take a while.
It is easy to get all caught up in the details, the specs, even with helmets, you were talking, having the visor up. I think it might be like Fortnite on YouTube, who was reviewing all these different helmets. And at one point he was like, and people get really obsessed with venting and, how does it cool and all these different things. He's like, every helmet has incredible venting, and just open the visor. I was like, just wear sunglasses, wear goggles.
Legit.
Like, if you really find a helmet that fits, find something that's comfortable, and then worry about, there's all these different concerns that you can get so caught up with. And I'm sure on your end of it, hearing people trying to make these decisions, it is very easy to get caught up in that whirlpool of what do I need in this? And it's all hypothetical. And you kind of just want to be like, just pick something, get out there and learn for yourself and find out what annoys you and figure out what your specific, I need this. And it's going to be different from other people. So
yeah, we don't do a whole lot of learning for ourselves anymore. That's the one thing that I noticed being in I guess just a consumer in general, but it's nice to have a lot of information if you that kind of person, but
you can get caught up in it.
Yeah, you can definitely, you can get overwhelmed by it. And then you don't make a decision at all, or you make a bad decision because you're just like, I'll just take this one. But yeah, I do miss having to go look for stuff, having to go to the library, or somebody recommends a book to you and then you got to find it. It's you got to call
a
around,
treasure hunt, right?
Or you used to go through the phone book and be like, I'll call all these places and see if they got that thing that I need or that thing that I want. And I was just on Instagram the other day, and there was a sign painter guy, and he's like, I made up a bunch of stickers. If you want one, send me a Sazy. I was like, oh my God, that's cool. So you DM him and you get his address, and then you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and he sends you a sticker back. That's the way shit used to go, man. You wanted something cool from somebody, you send them an envelope with a sticker on it, and they'd send you a photograph or, a sticker or a catalog. And I remember what a big deal it was, getting a catalog in the mail from, back in those days. I remember being an outdoorsy guy, getting the Eastern Mountain Sports catalog or REI catalog or the Bridgestone catalog, oh man, look at this. I can look at everything, it's a paper thing, and we don't do paper hardly anymore. At my shop, the BMW guys haven't put out a paper catalog for, quite some time. And there's still paper guys who come in.
And I held on to the last BMW catalog I grabbed was from your shop back in 2017 when Gina and I visited after we got back from a ride across the country. And it's a memento of that, but also that's when you and I first started talking about Longmire and probably 45 other things, as we typically do when we get together.
That it reminds me of the road trip we took. I expected we just kind of kick back and listen to tunes and, just make the drive. And we didn't listen to the radio at all. We just talked.
Oh, when we bombed up to Portland to swap cars with Samantha?
Yeah.
Yeah, it went so
Which was
fast.
super cool.
That 11, 12-hour drive, because we drove up, spent the night sleeping on our floor, and drove back the next day.
Which I've done a couple times, and I think I've had almost the exact same experience. You go up with the right person, and you think, holy cow, it's what, 9 hours, 12 hours? Depending if you're hauling something or what the traffic situation is. But yeah, it just breezes by because you just start talking about something. Well, speaking about talking about something, I think this has been a really solid conversation. Was there anything else you wanted to get around to?
Beyond work, is there anything that you hope to gain this year?
Nothing I can think of. Need to get out there and enjoy the stuff that I got. We've talked about, I got a couple old Triumphs that need a few little tweaks so that we can kind of get out and do the vintage bike riding stuff.
Yeah, because you did promise to get those Triumphs roadworthy when I got the vintage
That's
BMWs
true.
recently.
And I'm going to do it. I miss riding those bikes. It's great to go out, push a button, something starts every time. You can stop every time. Riding an old bike gets a little hairy sometimes. But yeah, I'm going to throw this thing out here, just here at the end. But, we've all participated in the Gentleman's Ride, and that's a big deal for men's health awareness issues. And, I think it's great that we all get out there, whether you raise money or you just go out there. But I think as dudes, we've talked about it recently. If you're a dude or you know a dude who's in the zone, talk to them about getting a colonoscopy, getting a PSA check. There's a lot of people have had issues, mental health issues. I think it's important that we all get out there and we let people know that, we're there for them. If they need to talk about stuff. Christmas before last, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So this whole last year, I've been going through that rigmarole. And, I think I'm going to be okay, but I just wanted to toss it out there. Every day is a gift. It doesn't matter when your time comes up. We just need to take time and appreciate every day
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate those people around us. It went better when I practiced at home.
That was fantastic.
But I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate the community that you've built. Just such a great bunch of folks, and we were talking about a bunch of them before the podcast. I've just got to meet such a bunch of great folks, and it's been a privilege to be part of this organization but I still feel like I'm a plank owner of the Sunday Moto Club. And I just, I think we all just need to take a little time every day and just appreciate what we got.
I agree. I think the mantra for a lot of people, myself included, first and foremost, is reevaluate, move forward. It's easy to dwell on the past. It's easy to beat ourselves up about failed opportunities, failed relationships. Are we making the right decision? Almost on a minute by minute basis. But yeah, and it really is true about talking about it, especially with guys. We need to ride. I hold people accountable, as you know. And I can't let myself get too down when people don't show up for a ride or they can't. But freeing myself up as I have recently from the corporate life. Yeah. Ross Schaefer, good friend of mine up in Petaluma. We got a ride. Let's plan it out. JP Defoe, that's in Sebastopol. It's hard getting up to Sonoma County, especially on an old clunky vintage bike.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm going to make it happen. You're on the way. So I'm going to have to scoop you up and bring you up there. I know we've talked about hanging out with Ross, right? Because it's worth it. The fight is worth it. The fight is mandatory when it comes to these topics. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those things where you got to make the appointment kind of thing. I think I used to have a buddy, getting back to the time between officer candidate school, when when you're supposed to be running and doing pull-ups and all those kind of Marine Corps things. Somehow I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. I don't like to get up early. I don't like to shave, and I don't like to run. But, I did those things like every single day. So I had a buddy, and he would show up. Well, he would call me and he'd say, like, we're going for a run. And I'd be like, oh, I got stuff to do, whatever. And he'd be like, I'm in your fucking lobby. Get down here, So I had no excuse, because he was down there waiting for me. And so I had to throw on my running gear and we'd go out for a run, even though I hated it. But sometimes I think, it's just a matter of popping in there and being like, hey, you want to go for a ride? What do you really got going on?
Or Sunday Moto Club yesterday, I show up a little early. It starts at 8 a.m. and woke up and been trying to get up early and make a practice of that and find the ways to make it work, because you got to motivate. I think some people are morning people, but most of us just have to find a strategy.
Especially when it's cold and dark
Especially
right
when
now.
it's cold. And we show up and I'm feeling pretty good. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll wake up and I'll feel fine. And then about an hour, my energy just dips. And I was like, what the hell? I thought I hit it just right. And people start showing up right as my energy dips. And I was just like, God, I don't want to talk to anyone. I'm so tired. And you just push through it, because I was like, you know what, though? We haven't had a Sunday Moto Club meet up in a while. And you get into a good conversation, and halfway through it, I was just like, this is the best. And I'm still there, super tired, and kind of just pushing through it. And it always reminds me that it is sort of like an action before motivation thing, whether it's, your hobbies, whether it's your community, committing to it and kind of getting out there, and especially other people, checking in with folks, hanging out with them, creating those opportunities to be able to talk about stuff. I joked earlier, you spend a lot more time standing around bikes talking than you do riding them half the time. And that's kind of the secret sauce. People think, oh, it's a motorcycle club. You're, dragging knees and you're always at 60 miles an hour. I think the secret is most of the time we're standing around talking, having the best time ever. And then in between, we have these wonderful experiences riding around on two wheels. But it is the people. It's always been the people.
Yeah.
It's funny when I describe it to people, I'm like, we meet for coffee, then we go for a ride, then we eat lunch, and then we go for a ride. And we usually have coffee, and then we all break up and go wherever we go. And it's a social club with motorcycles. It's kind of like that St. Louis thing. It's a beer drinking town that likes baseball or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but it's like a baseball town. Oh man, I can't remember what it is. But there's that kind of thing. But yeah, it's the people that I've met there, and such a wide variety of folks, which is like you were talking about earlier too. It's like, what do you do? Oh, well, what do you do? And it's not just like everybody's not like Silicon Valley tech geek kind of guy. Although there's those people there too, And honestly, like some of them, I didn't expect that to be them. I expected them to be the dude who was like the fabricator guy, or, I don't know, the guy who worked at the, sourdough bakery or whatever, kind of not the tech guy.
Or you end up inspiring that too. Like, I think, how many people do we know that are software engineers or whatever else, and not knocking that and not saying that isn't like a, valuable passion for someone or that is their calling, but plenty of people, you get out and you ride, and because they're sort of taken out of that monoculture, and you just get to shoot the shit and talk about stuff and throw ideas back and forth. And it's not just about work. It's not just about tech stuff that preoccupies so much of their time. It is this oasis away from that, and lets them think about their life in a different way. And half these people end up, I really do want to pursue this other thing, even though it's not the safe move, or it's, a step down monetarily from what I normally do, or whatever else it is. And that kind of stuff is wonderful too. Just bikes facilitating conversation, facilitating, imagination, and
well, I think
just freedom.
Here in Silicon Valley, a lot of our software engineer friends have NDAs where they can't talk. I used to get so enraged.
It's true.
You say you're a project manager. I need more information. Nah, you really don't mind that, because they can't, or it's so droll that they are picking other people's brains. But it's about the motion.
Or they assume you won't be interested. I love hearing about some of these jobs, and someone's like, "You really don't. It's boring and dry." And I'm like, "Look, I'm not in it, so I love hearing about it. For me, it's exotic because I don't hear about it all day." And getting people to open up about, well, I do this, and you're like, "That's so rad." And they're like, "Is it? Yeah." Anyway, let's go.
But you never know either. It could be like, yeah, I do coding, but honestly, I've like seen every Jawbreaker show. I travel all over the country, you know, and it's just like, I've been to every bowling alley show they've done,
Yeah.
Everybody's got like a lot of unique stuff. And I mean, it's just cool because we all get to peel the onion when we get together, and it's not just, I like that our conversations don't necessarily start from like most interactions, social interactions where, oh, what do you do? I think that's like the worst fucking question to ask somebody right off the bat.
I try not to ask people. I try to ask, like, what do you do when you're not like, I haven't found my question.
Yeah, it's hard because I don't want to ask that, but it's an easy way to get into conversation. But for us, it's like, how long have you had that bike? Or,
that's true.
Dude, how did you choose this one? Or I've never seen a black and gold version of your bike or whatever. Oh, I custom painted that or what, I mean, there's so many better entries into a conversation than whatever social event you usually go to and you got to talk to people.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I thought it was wonderful when we're able to, so many of us met, was it 8 or 9 of us met for the Interpol concert last year?
Oh my God.
At the Greek. And you had Noel flew up from San Diego, happened to be in town. He's a 3D animator that's worked for Apple and all these highfalutin companies. He does not want to talk about work. And Jay Ward from Pixar's there, and my coworker at the time, Ryan Thompson, who's worked for a lot of wonderful automotive and motorcycle companies, was there. And we're talking about music. Jay rides up on his Triumph Thruxton. I think a coworker had retired from Pixar after 25, 27 years or something. We're talking about the vehicles that he saw there. And it's never really about work, because especially at our age, when you're in your 50s, we're in the twilight. It's like work. well, what can we do outside of work? That's why it's always fun to find out from people, find out from our guests, beyond work, what do you hope to gain or do? And a lot of people have said kind of either a reset button, or I want to do something with my daughter or son working on this vehicle, or I want to finally go to these places. Again, it's, reevaluate and move forward.
And checking in with people as well, like seeing McGinnis, and we were talking about, we've been hanging out for what, 5 odd years now, and just the changes, and people get married, they have kids, and it's kind of like we were saying with all this, like there's so much information now, and yet it almost paralyzes you into not doing something. I think with relationships, because you see what's going on in people's lives, it's easy to feel like you're a part of it. And then the years go by and you realize, oh, I wasn't actually active in a part of that. It was like I was following a TV show and I happen to know the characters personally. So things like
a good
rides,
analogy. Yeah.
you can't do a virtual motorcycle ride for better and for worse, right? But I mean, even in the pandemic, pretty good pandemic activity. You're head to toe covered. You got a helmet on. You got gloves.
You dress like an astronaut.
It was
the
pretty
ultimate
great.
pandemic.
Like we met up and would go on rides, and I was like, "This is actually totally fine. This is pretty cool," and it does keep you engaged. It does just it gets you in that tangible space with one another, which is awesome.
I will say I do appreciate you send me a lot of little Instagram stories and stuff like that, and I love clicking on those. I don't always get an opportunity to like make a comment on stuff, but I got a couple of friends who do that stuff, and it's just a lot of times it's stuff that I don't see, and I don't know how this algorithm stuff works, and I don't know if who I'm really like actively following, and just how I mean, I follow a ton of people on Instagram because it's like, oh, that's cool, and again, I hope I'm not doing this wrong by like liking 50 pictures of a dude's, because I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. I like that picture. I like that picture. I like that picture. And somebody's probably like, this whack job has liked a bunch of my stuff. Is he trying to sell something or whatever? But I mean, that's the way I do Instagram. And so when somebody sends me something that I don't look at or I haven't seen, I super appreciate that, because it's always cool shit. I mean, maybe I'm like an easy to read guy. Like I like cool shit. So people send me all sorts of stuff.
The fact that we're both from the Midwest, we're in our mid to late, mid 50s. We have a lot in common. There are a lot of the people that I've brought up during this episode. I do the same thing with in different forms. And it's a stopgap way to stay in touch beyond the phone calls I make, the text I send, and the in-person visits I make. So it's really hard work to have friends. Acquaintances, we have several, but to have friends, it's a lot of reciprocity. And there are times where that friend is in your world. Other times they've got things going on, but I can pick up the phone and talk to my friend Steve Smith, who I've known since 1988, who I invited and brought to Flat Out Friday and the Mama Tried show that couple Decembers ago. And we had an absolute blast. And it takes work, just like any relationship, like a healthy relationship. You should be pretty tired at the end of the day because you've made a big effort, right?
It does. It does take work, but I do like that. I mean, I don't have that many friends, but the friends I do have, I feel like even if I haven't been in touch with them for a long time, I can reach out anytime, say like anything, and then it's just like we haven't been apart, which is super cool as well. But yeah, it's nice to be actively engaged and keep your friend network alive, kind of thing, as opposed to hoping that you've still got that connection after all those years. But I want to thank you again for taking me on that Interpol trip, man. That was so cool. I mean, that was just, I'm so bummed that we didn't get to go backstage and meet Sam, especially after it was such a great podcast and just, I mean, I was super excited about that. I mean, the show was fantastic and I love the show. I will say this. Do you think they missed out by not like kicking off the show by just going like, how are things on the West Coast?
Yes.
I mean, to me, that was
obvious,
like,
but sometimes the obvious thing is the right thing.
But I was like, that would have just like,
I was crossing fingers,
got everybody jazzed. I just, again, discovered this technological thing where like my last year's, like, this is what you listened to last year. And man, I listened to the shit out of Our Love to Admire.
It's my favorite album of theirs.
I love it. I mean,
is that the one with the
It's
The
got
lion.
Yeah.
the lion on
And
the
the
cover.
Yeah.
That's the one I found. Like you, I used to find stuff by the cover. I'd go to the library and I'd go through the CDs and I'd get 10 at a time, strictly based on what looked cool. And the hit rate was pretty high. And they were
It
one of
was.
those. It was I Love to Admire.
That is a good one. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, that is a great album. The funny thing is like because I have this weird thing too where like I will listen to the same song just over and over and over and over and over and over again. So, I don't know why I do it. Maybe that is. But the funny thing is so like I haven't listened to the last half of the album hardly at all.
It's a bad habit of mine as well.
But
Because
I've
you get stuck in a self-made early EP where you basically are like, oh, these 5 songs, this is the shit. And then you start the album over again, you don't realize.
I mean, the whole album is good. And when I got a long enough commute, I can get most of it in kind of thing. But for the most part, because of my whatever habit you call that by replaying the thing.
Yeah.
Like, I could pretty much sing along with There's No I in Threesome, but because I think that's one of the first 2 or 3 songs. But that is just such a great album.
That's fantastic. I was surprised to hear from him that it's a lot of people's least favorite Interpol, or it's like lower down, which made me feel very out of touch with the Interpol fandom because I was like, how on earth? But I have a habit of that too. Arctic Monkeys, my favorite album of theirs is Favorite Worst Nightmare. And I love AM, but apparently that's another one that it was kind of their first more polished studio album beyond their initial stuff. But in the same vein, I found the cover, thought it was rad, listened to it. It's my favorite. And then come to find out, people are like, yeah, not their strongest. I'm like, you guys don't know anything. This
Seriously.
is great.
I mean, that album is great. I love their first album. And I think that may have been like one of the only CDs that I had when we deployed to Kuwait before the war kicked off. And so like I had a Walkman and that was like my nightly listening CD.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotional ties to music. I know for me, for Henri, our whole household. I mean, there's always music playing.
I love that. Anybody who doesn't listen to either of these 2 stations should do Sunday morning. KSHE 95 out of St. Louis, Missouri does this classic show. And then they do a thing called Vinyl Exam, where they play a real record and then they talk about it. And these guys have been around forever. So these guys, like they've interviewed everybody. They've gone to the shows. They're like, oh yeah, I remember when this guy opened for Alice Cooper down at the Checker Dome or whatever kind of thing, But that show, and then K-Pig, which they say is the last great radio station in the United States, out of Freedom and Cayucos, not far from here down by Santa Cruz. That's just an eclectic mix of music, but you don't hear the same stuff. I will say, all right, maybe you hear similar kind of stuff on K-Pig. It's kind of, more roots rocky, country-ish kind of thing. But both of those shows, I mean, again, I like Metallica, but I like a little mix up on the classic rock stuff.
That's true.
Well, fantastic.
We took a wild left turn right at the end, didn't we?
What's not to like about Matt Park? When you see where he lives in Niles Canyon, his neighbors all have just such beautiful machines. Kind of old, well cared for. It's such a throwback to old Americana, which is an ideal fit. It's that wonderful reflection of Matt's personality and an extension with his community.
Motorcycles Are Drugs is produced in the San Francisco Bay Area. Stay tuned for a season of interviews and additional bonus episodes. You can find us online at motorcyclesaredrugs.com.